Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the final edition of On the Whistle from my trip out to Spain. Apologies, I must look incredibly tired. I certainly feel it, but I know that you won't judge me. So we're going to chat about Sunderland's friendly with CD Eldense, which they won 2-1, thanks to an absolute screamer from Louis Hamir. I'm trying to think about the last time I saw a Sunderland player score a goal that good in the flesh. You know, obviously there's like the Reading goal, the sort of team goals under Tony Mowbray, but in terms of an individual strike, I'm struggling to remember anything that good. If you can think of one, drop a comment in the comments because I'd love to hear it. It was an unbelievable strike from Hamir. What about the game itself? Well, it was a game in a sort of a few different parts really. Bris, as we expected, changed all 11 players, and you could see that Sunderland didn't have those sort of partnerships that they used to. I think before we make any assessments or comments about the players who played or the level of performance, you have to remember that there was new partnerships all over the pitch. Players who've never played with each other before. It was never going to be as fluid and as convincing as it would have been when you had like the team on Friday night, where most of those players have played together an awful lot. Eldense, I think, caught Sunderland out a little bit to begin with. I think it was a really good opponent because they were obviously much more acclimatised to the heat. It was well over 30 degrees again this evening, absolutely boiling out here in the Costa Blanca. They had a really high press and they caught Sunderland out a few times. Sunderland got to grips with it, scored a really good goal, an amazing pass from Ali Laushish. I mean, the ability that kid's got is frightening sometimes. An incredible crossfield pass, totally opened up the pitch, and a really good goal from Tommy Watson. Exactly what we've seen him do from the under-21s. Cut inside, only thinking about one thing, scoring a goal. Absolutely fantastic to see. Hopefully, he's given Bris a little bit of something to think about there. Sunderland were playing really well. There was a little water break for whatever reason. Eldense just came out far stronger. Completely dominated the game then for the 15 minutes up to half time, and probably the 25 minutes, half an hour after that. Sunderland just couldn't really get the ball back off them, to be honest, but I was impressed with them, and you could see there was some tired legs in the Sunderland ranks. Bris changed his entire outfield. We saw, well, A, an injection of fresh legs, and B, those more experienced players, and they completely turned the game, to be fair. Hamir won it with a wonder goal, but for the last 20 minutes, Sunderland were well on top. Dan Neil, I thought, was amazing. Completely took control back of that midfield, turned away from players like they weren't there, played some lovely passes. Jack Clark looked good. He certainly pushed Eldense back. So I thought it was a good exercise in the end. A good win. Eldense will feel like they should have got something out of the game, and they should have. I can think of 4 or 5 chances off the top of my head that they missed, and Simon Moore made one good save as well when there was a little error that allowed the strike to go through one-on-one. So yeah, good win, good test. I think we learnt a lot. Not the most convincing performance, but as I've said before, I think you've got to remember A, the fact that this isn't a familiar team in terms of they're not familiar with each other, and B, I think you have to remember the conditions and the fact that, understandably, Eldense far more comfortable with it. So let's get into your questions anyway. Thanks again for sending so many of these in. Stephen Elliott says, seems a much more meaningful tour compared to last season's trip to the US, both in terms of fitness and levels of opposition, to hopefully get us up to speed quicker than when we did last season. We felt like we were playing catch up. So I totally agree with this. I think one of the things that Tony Mowbray made clear, you might remember Sunderland finished last pre-season with a game against Mallorca at the Stadium of Light. Mallorca, a really good La Liga team. And Mowbray basically said, we needed to be playing this level of opposition sooner. And I think the 2 opponents on this tour have been really, really strong, and it's been a hugely beneficial exercise. Nottingham Forest, obviously, with all their Premier League quality, and Eldense, as I said, they're playing the 2nd division Spanish tier, which is a decent standard, and you could see from the fitness levels they had, from some of the technical quality they had, it was a good test for Sunderland. So I agree with you, Stephen. I think this sets Sunderland up for this season much better. The only thing I would say to your question is, it's funny to look back on those first 2 games that Sunderland lost last season. Well, Ipswich was a really tight game, and Ipswich went on to win automatic promotion, so actually that was a decent performance. And when I interviewed Alan Brown for the first time this week, actually at the training camp, he mentioned that second game of the season where you might remember Preston beat Sunderland 1-0 at Deepdale, and he said there is absolutely no way we should have beaten Sunderland. They were brilliant that day, and it was one of the games that made him see the quality in Sunderland's squad. They made him want to sign. So I just thought that was an interesting quirk. I actually think the main reason Sunderland lost those games was because they just didn't have enough quality in the final third at that time in the season. And there's probably still a little bit of a question mark over that at the moment. But I do agree with you, Stephen. Some cause for optimism there. Martin Turner says, Thoughts on 09 during pre-season, Phil? How's he looked at centre-back? Some talk of a move. Could think there could be anything in that. I'll be honest with you, Martin, no idea where that's come from. Absolutely no suggestions of that whatsoever from within the camp or being around the group. Football's a weird thing, strange things can happen, things can change quickly, but I think 09 will be the captain's armband this season. I think he's an absolute core player of the side. They really like his experience, his leadership within the group. I think that he brings a lot with his passing range. I know he's not everybody's cup of tea as a central defender, but I think him and Ballard was probably one of the main things in the team that was sort of succeeding and working well last season. So I'll be honest with you, Martin, not heard anything about a move, don't see it. He's got 2 years left on his deal. I think he's seen as a critical part of this team. I'd be absolutely staggered if he left. Funny things in football, but I just don't see it, Martin. I think he starts the first day of the season with the captain's armband. So a couple of you asked, Mark Whitehead was one of them, a couple of others, so thanks for sending this in. I'll lump it all in together. Any new information on who will make up the backroom staff? Will RLB be bringing in his own people or person? Mark actually asked if there was any news on the bathroom staff, but I'm going to guess that was an autocorrect issue, so we'll go with backroom staff. Yeah, I spoke to Régis Lebris after the game. He didn't have a lot to say on it, I'll be completely honest. He just said that there was no significant update at the moment and that he was still speaking to potential candidates. He said that there might be some news next week or a little bit later. So appreciate that's not a huge update for you. The one thing you can take from it is that clearly they are still going to appoint somebody, at least one person, to a staff, and that, by the sounds of things, is definitely going to happen before the season starts at least, but as of yet, no progress on that. So sorry that's not the most detailed answer, but that's all I have for you at the moment. A few people are asking about the squad depth. Olaf says, based on this performance, how worried do we need to be about squad depth? And Tony says, is it fair to say that none of tonight's starters made a strong case for themselves being in the Championship starting 11? Quite a tricky one to answer this, because I think you have to be fair to those players, and as I said at the start, a lot of these guys in some cases are coming back from injuries or from seasons where they didn't play much last year, so they are behind other players. In huge parts of the pitch, there was complete new partnerships. Alan Brown and Elliot Embleton have never played together. So I think, Joe Anderson and Leo Hjelde had never played together until 20 minutes the other night. So I think that you have to put their individual performances in that context. It's a much harder environment for them to sort of impress and shine. I'm a lot more positive about the performance and some of the comments I'm getting. I'm completely understand it, and I'm not being naive in that Eldense obviously dominated large parts of the game, but I thought there were quite a few positives. I thought Leo Hjelde was promising again. I thought Joe Anderson was outstanding. I don't know what's next for Joe Anderson. He obviously needs to be playing regularly. I don't know if he can play his way into the starting 11 for the Championship. It's one game. We'll have to wait and see, and it's pre-season. Anderson was brilliant tonight. Made two huge challenges early on that stopped Eldense from scoring. His distribution was really good. Made good decisions throughout, really calm. I thought he was excellent, to be honest. It's not me saying he should be in the starting 11 for the first game of the Championship season, but I was really impressed with his performance. And so I would disagree to say that none of these players sort of put their hand up and impressed. Embleton's got a lot of work to do, but again, I thought he looked sharp, he looked at it. After a couple of dodgy moments early on, I thought he played well. Put one beautiful cross in that Roosen just couldn't get on the end of. I think that Mundell, although he's clearly, at this stage, I don't think he's going to be ahead of Clark and Roberts in the pecking order. I think he looks a live wire. I think he's got qualities that I like. I think it's perfectly natural that, you're going to have players who at this stage of the season are ahead of others. And I think at the moment, if we're honest, there aren't that many places up for grabs in the team. I think it's going to be Patterson, Trey Hume, 09, Dennis Sirkin probably, Dan Neil, Jack Clark, Patrick Roberts, Job. And so, there are, I don't think there's any doubt that 7 or 8 are nailed on for that first game of the season pretty much. And it's absolutely right that the same level of quality probably isn't there at the moment, but I'm not too pessimistic about that. We know that someone needs to strengthen some areas of the pitch. We know they need to add a striker. That's obviously critical. We know that if Jack Clark goes, they need to add a high caliber replacement. But I wouldn't be quite so sure or quite so negative on some of these players. I actually think there were some positive signs in the challenging environment, albeit I completely agree that, I think the starting 11 is not far off kind of being there at the moment. Just following on from that, Jack says, Hjelde's impressed at centre-back so far. Unlikely Ballard will be fit for Cardiff. Do you start him or Elise next to 09? Completely agree with you. Hjelde wasn't quite as eye-catching tonight as he had been on Friday because he was making these big striding runs against Nottingham Forest. But he did really well. There was a couple of errors towards the end of his sort of time on the pitch, but I think that was fatigue as much as anything. It was punishing heat. Sunderland were playing with a really high line. It was noticeable tonight how high up the pitch they were pressing. Put a lot of demands on the defenders. Generally mopped up really well. Really vocal Hjelde as well, which I like about him. He's one of the loudest players on the pitch. Really directs the players around him, which I like. Real positive signs from him this season, but so far this pre-season. But at the moment, I think, I like the idea of Elise and Serkin being in the same team. I think the balance is lovely with, 2 left footers on the left, 2 right footers on the right. I still think that position is up for grabs, but at the moment, because of how well Elise finished last season and because of what we've seen from him when he's been fit since he joined the club, I would put him slightly ahead. But for sure, Hjelde's showing that, maybe the player that we saw when he first arrived, he's got a lot more to his locker. And I actually spoke to him after the game, and he was saying that, he had quite a lot of niggling injuries when he first arrived at the club. And maybe it wasn't the ideal time to move, but he just felt it was an amazing opportunity that he wanted to take. And he kind of feels like he's fully fit now, and we're seeing the best of him, and I definitely agree with that. So he's got a chance for sure, but definitely I think at the moment Elise is probably slightly ahead. Let's see what else we've got. Yeah, the boy Jones says, what's the strongest 11 so far? I think I've kind of answered that in the previous question. At the moment, I think the starting 11 looks like being Patterson, Hume, O'Nien, Elise, Serkin, probably Neil. Then there's a big question mark there. Rigg, I think, is ahead at the moment. Alan Brown will hope to force his win. Alan Brown looked excellent tonight, but obviously he's a little bit behind the others on his fitness, so can he catch that up in time for Cardiff? We'll see. Then you're probably looking at Roberts, Jobe, Clark. Up front, I think it's still a debate, isn't there? And obviously a position which Sunderland are looking to recruit. So I do feel like that strongest 11 is probably not far out at the moment, but that's not a criticism of a lot of the other lads, because players like Embleton, who I've mentioned, I do think he's got something to say this season and can play his way in. I just think the reality is, obviously, because of his injuries, fitness-wise, he's coming quite far behind. Sorry, I'm just having some coffee to try and get me through this video before I can have some sleep, because it is very late out here. Ryan says, would you loan Hamir out or Meander out? Can't see them keeping them both for the season if we bring in another, as we also have Reeson who can play a part. Yeah, really good question, Ryan. The Hamir conundrum, man, it's so difficult, isn't it? Because you can see why, with that goal, Sunderland bought him and why they persist with him, because his finishing is genuinely, he's got real talent. He has such an explosive shot. I've seen now, because I've been lucky enough over the last year or so to go to quite a lot of open training sessions, and to be honest with you, it's not that much of a surprise. His finishing is really good. He's got such a powerful shot on him, and there is 100% something there, but it's just the other areas of his game where I think there's still those question marks. Meander has shown huge signs of promise in the times I've seen him so far this pre-season. He's definitely taken a leap forward, and in some ways, even though Hamir grabbed the headlines of that incredible goal tonight, and let's hope it can be a catalyst for him, given the standard of opposition, Meander's performance the other night was probably even more impressive because of the way he was able to compete against Premier League players. But I agree with you. I think the dilemma is that with Hamir especially, like, the things that you want him to improve is you want him to sort of adjust to the new environment. You want to keep building his fitness. Probably the best way to do that is to keep him in-house, to work with him really closely. But I think if he's not going to play, then you risk his value depreciating and his confidence depreciating just too much. So I do think, despite his goal tonight, there's maybe a strong argument for loaning Hamir out. What I would say is none of those strikers are going to go until Sunderland recruit their own. I think that's obvious. I think all three have shown signs of promise in pre-season. All three look like they need to do a little bit more as well. But I think that there is some promise there, and I don't see any of them going until Sunderland have recruited, which we know is probably their big priority between now and the end of the window. So in answer to your question, Ryan, I could see one or both of them going out, but I think it's a little early. And both of them, I would say, either Hamir with his fantastic goal tonight and Meander with his really good performance against Notts Forest, both have given themselves a platform, and let's hope they can go and kick on in the coming weeks. Last but by no means least, sorry, couldn't get that one out. My really good friends from the German Black Cats, I'd just like to say hello to you all. Lovely to hear from you. Fantastic people. It says, are Hamir, Meander and maybe Mendy enough striker options for a good offence in the Championship? I think it's a really difficult one. That's when I talked the other night about the Mendy deal and how Sunderland are deciding whether that's the deal they really want to do. obviously the dilemma there is he's a bit of an unknown quantity, isn't he? And you're then potentially taking kind of 3 unknown quantities, 4 with recent to an extent, into the campaign. And that's why I kind of feel like maybe the preference ultimately would be for a slightly more experienced championship striker. We'll have to wait and see whether they can get one of those over the line. I do think that there's loads I like about this team from what I've seen in pre-season. I think Bris is getting his ideas across. I think they're going to be on the front foot again. I think they're going to press really high. I think we're going to enjoy watching this team again, and I think they're going to be a real threat. However, the evidence of pre-season, other than, don't get me wrong, Hamir's incredible strike, is that they do still need a little bit more in the final third. I think that is fair. They are probably still lacking that little bit of X factor and penalty box presence. So hopefully, I still think that's something they need to address in the transfer market. From all the conversations I have, they're well aware of that as well. So I do think it's something that they will go and address. So yeah, hopefully that answers your questions. I think they need a little bit more, and let's hope they can get it. But thanks so much for all your questions. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope I've been coherent, because I maybe feel like I'm not. But it's been so good this week engaging with you all, getting all your questions, having these conversations. I've really enjoyed it. And we'll be back after the Blackpool game on Saturday. They come round quick with another edition on the whistle. But yeah, just some